must confess, I've not been looking forward to making this particular video. You may remember a couple of weeks ago I interviewed Clive Edwards on how to escape the Matrix. And in that interview, he said something that took me aback rather.
You mentioned that the people in the Bill of Rights, there's no people in the Bill of Rights, 1688, because that, again, there's only two jurisdictions. So that deals with state citizens.
Anyway, needless to say, those of you that do hold the Bill of Rights in high esteem got in contact via the comments, and I had emails. And as many of you know, we at Council Watch have worked quite closely in the past with Lance and Brian from the Peacekeepers, and they had a few things to say on the video as well. Brian in particular had some questions that he wanted Clive to answer. So here's what Brian has written. Now there is a link beneath this video in the description. It's an analysis of claims versus verifiable evidence. Here are the primary claims from the interview, followed by the verifiable evidence from primary legal and historical sources, and a direct question for Clive to answer for the purposes of a debate. The claim: the people are excluded from the 1688 Constitution. Clive's claim: the Bill of Rights 1688 and the English Constitution are statutory stuff that apply only to subjects and citizens, not to the people. Verifiable evidence: this is factually incorrect. The primary sources of the 1688 settlement state the opposite. The Bill of Rights 1688 explicitly states in its preamble that it is lawfully, fully and freely representing all the estates of the people in this realm. The Act of Settlement 1700 confirms this, stating the laws of England are the birthright of the people thereof. Question for Clive: given that the Bill of Rights 1688 explicitly states it is representing all the estates of the people, on what specific clause or primary source do you rely to claim that the people are excluded from this settlement? 2. The claim: voting, the electoral roll, is a trap. Clive's claim: registering to vote is an act of consent that makes you a citizen and a ward of the state, thereby removing your rights. Verifiable evidence: this is the opposite of the established legal truth. The right to vote is a foundational power, not a trap. The landmark case of Ashby versus White was brought by a man, Matthew Ashby, who sued a constable for denying him his right to vote. The House of Lords, the highest court, ruled in Ashby's favour, establishing that the right to vote is a fundamental, common law property right, and that to deny it is a legal injury for which a remedy must be provided. Question for Clive: the House of Lords in Ashby versus White confirmed that the right to vote is a common law property right. How do you reconcile your claim that voting is a trap with the highest court's ruling that the denial of that vote is a legal injury? 3. The claim: the legal name versus Christian name. Clive's claim: your full name is a legal fiction or straw man, and that state has no jurisdiction over your Christian name. Verifiable evidence: the distinction is not recognised in law. The legal system grants rights to and imposes duty on persons and individuals. The foundational case of Entick versus Carrington was about protecting the rights of the real person, John Entick, in his real home against state officials. The court prosecuted the individual, not a fiction. Question for Clive: you claim that the law only has jurisdiction over a legal name. Can you provide any primary source? A statute or binding judgment, like Entick versus Carrington, that establishes this legal distinction and confirms that a person can evade legal duties by only using their Christian name. 4. A claim: the 1560 Scottish Act binds the UK. Clive's claim: the Confession of Faith Ratification Act 1560 binds the entire UK state to accept the Bible as infallible truth. Verifiable evidence: this is historically and legally incorrect. This act was passed by the Parliament of Scotland in 1560. The Union with Scotland Act in 1706, which created Great Britain, was passed 147 years later. Question for Clive: given that the Confession of Faith Ratification Act was an act of the Scottish Parliament passed 147 years before the Act of Union 1706 created Great Britain. What is your specific legal authority for claiming it binds the modern United Kingdom? And finally, Claim 5. Trusts are theft. Clive's claim you cannot lawfully put a title in a trust as this is theft, verifiable evidence. This is a misunderstanding of the law of equity, the law's conscience, is foundational to the Constitution, and the trust is its primary legal device. The supremacy of equity was established in the Earl of Oxford's case. Courts have long affirmed that public funds are trust funds, citing cases like Roberts v Hopwood, 1925. Question for Clive. Your argument relies on holding officials to a fiduciary duty, which is the highest duty of a trustee in the law of trusts. How can you logically claim that the trust is theft while simultaneously using the legal principles of trust to hold the state to account? And I sent them to Clive, and he has just sent me his response via video, which I will pop at the end of this video in its entirety. So the reason I've not been looking forward to making this video isn't because we've got polar opposite views to contend with. No, that's fine. It's good to discuss these things. My dislike of this type of video is how divisive it gets in the comments. And when one considers what we're all up against, fighting amongst ourselves does feel rather like shooting ourselves in the foot. So why am I making it then, you might be asking? Well, we do try and get information correct on Council Watch, and the thing is, I don't know. So I need to put both sides of the argument across, and you, the viewer, can make up your own minds. But before we get into Brian and Clive, there's a few points of my own I wish to make. It has been said to me that it is dangerous and wrong to put incorrect information out. And yes, I do agree, but at the same time, we've all got to use our own judgment on things. Part of the main reason we have got into this mess is because we have outsourced everything. We've outsourced law and order. We've outsourced how our food is grown, how our children are educated. Everything has been outsourced, and our trust has been put in other people. And it is my belief that whatever happens to us, ultimately, is down to us. We need to take full and complete responsibility for what we do and say and believe. We also need to be aware of our own biases. And I know within myself that everything that Clive said, I really want that to be true, because anyone with even the slightest spiritual or religious leanings, of course, is going to feel that a higher power, the laws of that, far outweigh anything man-made. Also, I don't want to have to learn the law. I don't like it. So if there's a way of just taking myself out of the system and just completely say, go away, then that's very appealing to me. So because what Clive has said really resonates with my belief systems, so therefore it's absolutely imperative that I triple check everything because I'm so biased towards the information. But one thing I do know is truth will out. And we're in a time right now of great revelation. Everything is having a huge light shone on it. So if anybody is bad in any way, shape or form, it's going to come to light. So I don't get caught up in the, oh, so-and-so's a shill or whatever, because it's all going to become obvious. There is nowhere to run and nowhere to hide right now. And that includes ourselves. Any deficits in our character are going to become plain very, very quickly with what is descending upon us. So the truth is definitely coming out now in large dollops. So what for me is important is taking a stand. However imperfectly we might do it, taking a stand in the way that feels right to us and not getting into arguments when people choose to do it differently. There are so many arguments about those who are trying to fight the system from within the system and those who believe we should be doing it out of the system. For me, both are valuable. Those people that are trying to reset the system back to what it should have been originally have one hell of a battle on their hands. And their efforts are actually making it easier for those of us that want to get out the system. Because, make no mistake, they are doing everything they can to destroy every aspect of our lives. They want to get rid of juries. Now, if that is allowed to happen, it's not a huge stretch of the imagination to see where this will go, and everything will be run by AI in due course. In fact, I have an interview coming out next week with Sandy Adams on just this subject. And although we know this is where it's heading, it's quite chilling to hear the details of it. So yes, we do have much bigger battles to fight than with each other. So, as I said, I have been going through everything Clive told me in that interview with a fine-tooth comb. And also, I attended an event he put on last weekend in Wells, where I was able to raise some of the things that concern me. Now, I haven't had time to check through everything he said, but there were two that really flagged up. So the first thing that concerned me was his statement about the pronouns. My dyslexic brain does not do grammar terribly well, I must confess. So I spent a big chunk of time researching that in the Bill of Rights, people is a pronoun and therefore doesn't actually mean the people. And on Clive's website, he's got a screenshot of precisely what a pronoun is. But anyway, I did my own research on it. People is a noun, not a pronoun. It is the plural form of person and refers to human beings. But it cannot replace a noun like a pronoun, e.g. they, he, she can. Now, I even managed to find a forum where someone asked that exact question. If people could ever be considered a pronoun. People is not a pronoun. It's just a noun. And the example given, which really helped me wrap my head around it, was Bill and Bob are here and they are hungry. They refers back to and replaces Bill and Bob so that we don't need to repeat the names. We can't use people in the same way. Bill and Bob are here and people are hungry. Here, people would not be understood as referring specifically and only to Bill and Bob. It would probably be interpreted as referring to multiple or all of the people who are present. So therefore, I cannot get on board with Clive's assertion that people is a pronoun. And he will go into why he thinks that is later on in the video, and you can make up your own mind. So the other part I really struggled with were the oath. Now, he was correct about the king taking 2 oaths, one of which is to God, but I just don't agree with him saying that judges take 2 oaths, one of which is to God. And you can see it here on his website. I, whatever your name is, do swear by Almighty God that I will be faithful and bear true allegiance to His Majesty King Charles. Now, he says faithful means sincerely religious, devout, pious, etc. And majesty, greatness of grandeur. Now, great was the earliest English use with reference to God or Christ as a title of address or dignity to kings and queens. So for me, this oath, God is the witness. It's not to God. And just because it's got the word faithful in it and majesty, personally, that doesn't feel like a strong enough reason to say that oath is to God. And the question I asked when I was there was, well, what happens if you've got judges that have different faiths? So a Hindu judge could swear to Gita, Muslim to Allah, Sikh, Guru Nanak. Now, being determined to get to the bottom of this, I also asked a friend whose brother used to be a judge, and he said, if you take an oath, and it's not just the Christian faith this relates to, you are binding yourself in the presence of God to whatever is the subject of the oath, e.g. to tell the truth or allegiance to the crown, or to interpret accurately in the court. If you don't have a religious faith, you affirm, which has the same effect in law. So you don't exactly swear an oath to the king or to the court, you are making a promise backed up by your faith. So yes, it's a good point about the atheist judges. So they're not giving allegiance to God at all in their oath. Now, I don't remember his exact response, but I think it was something along the lines of, it doesn't matter because it's the King James Bible that they all go by. But yes, that is when they're actually doing their judgy bit, but this is a personal oath. So for me, that isn't strong enough proof of this 2-tier system. Now, during the weekend, Clive did make a throwaway comment about Freemasons. Now, that actually, not that I'm an expert on that subject, but I believe they do take the Bible quite seriously. So yes, with the number of judiciary and police that are purported to be in the Freemasons, so he might be onto something there, but then you can't guarantee that every police officer and every judge is going to be a Freemason. So as Clive will talk you through in just a moment, he believes that there is the two systems, the secular and the one following the Bible. Now, if there isn't these two systems, I can still see why what he's done has worked, because he's managed to tie the council up in knots using their own constitution and various legislation, which I must confess did have me grinning from ear to ear by the time he'd finished recounting what he'd done. But if it is just that part of it, once councils get wise to it, they might find other ways of dealing with it. So I don't know how many people could be successful with it. So I really don't know. And also there is the issue that a regular Council Watch viewer, John, put to me that, we don't want people just completely ignoring planning law and going around building what the hell they like, because we would ruin the countryside, and none of us want that. But equally, we do need to push back when things are very unfair, like, Clive just minding his own business, putting up a fence to secure his property. So it's finding that balance with it. I will continue to research and make up my own mind what path I take. I'm not going to follow anybody blindly, because I know the results are down to me. Now, for anyone that did watch the last video and thinks that all they've got to do is take themselves off the electoral roll, no, there's a lot more to it, and you will have one hell of a battle on your hands. Clive's had the police turn up by the van load with dogs. He's had them threatening to demolish his house with a bulldozer, and it's taken a lot of strength and a lot of courage to do what he's done. And do not for 1 minute think it's the easy path, because it isn't. Anyway, my final area of confusion for the time being is, if I've understood Clive correctly, he thinks that the Bill of Rights isn't really to do with God, but I thought one of its main components was making sure that nobody changed the religion of England, that it was to stay permanently a Protestant country. But anyway, despite the points I don't agree with Clive on, I can't fault him on his tenacity and determination to stand up for himself and to never give in. There's a lot to be said for that. So I do hope this video isn't as divisive as I fear it probably will be. Can we find a way to disagree vehemently with one another's point of view while still keeping some coherence and respecting each other's right to do things differently in ways that we don't agree with? I hope we can get to that point where we can hold a different point of view for someone without it turning into handbags at 20 paces. But anyway, we will see. So I will pass you over to Clive to walk you through what he believes to be true, and then you can make up your own mind. So until next time, take care.
So it was with some reluctance that I'm sat here doing this interview. It's not something that I like to engage in or wanted to debate online about law and governance. I've got no interest in that, because I'm ploughing forward with what I'm doing. And I feel my articles speak for themselves and evidence what the lawmakers themselves state about law and governance. So I try to take my opinion out of it, because my opinion is not important. This is not about Clive Edwards or Clive Edwards' method. This is how law and governance works. And I spent a large portion of my life testing this evidence as well. The Bible says to you to be diligent and to test these things. So that's what I've done, and what I continue to do. So I'm doing this video in response to the interview I had with Rachel, and I must say I thoroughly enjoyed that interview. There's a few interviews I do and I walk away thinking that was a good interview. I think the audience will get a lot out of that, and that seems to be how it went down. A lot of the audience seemed to really gained a lot from it. So I really did enjoy speaking with Rachel and her interview. Now, Rachel contacted me sometime afterwards, and so I think Rachel knows or might be friends with Brian from Peacekeepers. Now, I've never heard of Brian from Peacekeepers. I've no idea who he is, but apparently he's a friend of Rachel's, and he put some questions to Rachel for me to answer based on some of the statements I made in my interview. So my apologies to other peacekeepers out there. I don't know if Brian's the main peacekeeper. I don't know anything about your organisation. I don't know if he's just a member or whether he's the founder of the website. I have no idea. But I've been put in this position to respond to Brian's questions via Rachel. So I feel that I will on this one occasion. And it's probably worth responding to Brian's questions in this point to put to bed whether you can find freedom under the English Constitution. Now, a lot of people talk about the English Constitution. It might give you certain extra civil privileges, extra civil rights, and I don't doubt that. That's not in dispute. But if you want freedom from state control, the English Constitution's not going to help you. That's part of the state infrastructure. As I'll go through now, and since Brian's put me in this position, I will now look at the claims of the Peacekeepers, look at Brian's questions, and I'll let the audience decide, using just simple facts and logic, where we stand on the English Constitution. People often confuse the English Constitution, and because I talk about Council's Constitution, people don't understand the difference and lump me together with the English Constitution guys. Now, I've got nothing against these guys. This is not, I just mind my own business. I feel I've been forced into this position to come and make a video about it. I like to mind my own business and plough my own field. I don't look across at someone else's field and see what they're ploughing. It's none of my business. But as I said, I've been put in this position, so I feel I've had to respond now, and I have to talk about this English Constitution. So, a Council's Constitution talks about the framework of governance. That's what a Council's Constitution does. It lays out the framework of who does what at local government level. And this can be applied also at national government level. The local government level is just a mini version of London and how that operates. So a council's constitution is a document for the council on how it's going to be governed, and it's there to show the public and the people what the parameters of their governance are. That's totally different from the English Constitution, which lets citizens and subjects know about their civil rights. Now, again, I'm not saying you can use the English. If you're using the English Constitution, you may well have, and I'm pretty sure you will have, extra civil rights than a UK resident might have if you claim stand under the English Constitution. None of that's of any importance to me or any relevance, because I wouldn't have been able to do what I've done, i.e. build a farm in quotes or a small holding, if I stood under the English Constitution, because that's to do with the rights of citizens and subjects. That's got no relevance to me. I'm one of the people standing under God. So that's a fundamental principle I feel I must point out between a council's constitution and the English Constitution. And Charles Spurgeon said, discernment is not knowing the difference between right and wrong. Discernment is knowing the difference between right and almost right. And that is what I will evidence here today. And I feel there's another point to touch on, even amongst those that understand or follow the English Constitution. There's argument, I believe, in that realm of study about even what constitutes the English Constitution. There's no argument from any side over the Bible and which Bible to use. The legal system has told us that the KJV 1611 is the authorized version of the Bible, and that it's the infallible truth. So there's there's only lawful and legal, as I'm sure even Brian would agree. There's only lawful and legal. So there's no dispute that the legal side regard the Bible as the infallible truth. Now that's very important. Now, before I gave any time to looking at Brian's points, I said I wanted to, through Rachel, I said, Rachel, would you mind asking Brian 2 questions for me? And those are, does Brian regard God as the ultimate authority? And does Brian regard the KJV 1611 as the book of the law? And Brian very honestly came back and said yes to both of those. God is the ultimate authority and the KJV is the book of the law. So now I feel in these types of debates, there's a very good starting point. So with that, Brian and I are both in agreement on those points, and now we'll measure the English Constitution against the Bible and see how it fares. So thank you.
So here are the questions that Brian put forward to Rachel for me to have a look at. And but before we get into Brian's questions, which I will go through, I thought I'd first look at the Peacekeepers website, because it's not something I've looked at before. I don't know what they stand for, so I think it's good to go back there first to have a look, which is also why I asked Brian those 2 questions, because those 2 questions give me and Brian a common anchor. a datum point to go forward on. And that is also what the Bible does for society. Any atheist that is a citizen of the United Kingdom will have also agreed that the Bible is the infallible truth, because being an atheist citizen, you have consented to be governed, and giving that consent means you don't get to pick and choose which acts of parliament that you will abide by and believe in. You consent to the whole lot, which is why ignorance of the law is no excuse. So the Bible is the datum point for all of society, people and the resident citizens, members of the public under the king. So that is what we'll use as our datum point for this discussion. Brian's already pre-agreed that God's the ultimate authority and that the Bible is the book of law. So that's what I'll do now. We'll get back to Brian's points. First, I'd like to go across and have a look at what the Peacekeepers is all about and what they publicly proclaim. Now, I had a brief look over the Peacekeepers website, and I couldn't see the word God mentioned anywhere, or the Bible, I don't think. Now, I'm not gonna like, that's not a hill I'm gonna die on, but I didn't spend that much time on there. But I had a cursory look around, and I couldn't see the words God or Bible mentioned anywhere, or or God in the Bible mentioned in the hierarchy on their website. So that's my first point. So this clip here, this picture here from the Peacekeepers website, from Brian's website, says, the English Constitution, discover the constitutional chain of command and your supreme authority. Well, Brian's already stated that God is the supreme authority, and he regards the KJV Bible as the book of the law, which is why I wanted those things clarified at the very start. So I don't understand the thinking with this statement on their website. Are they claiming the English Constitution is above the Bible and God? It's not that clear what they're saying there, but it certainly looks like they're claiming that the English Constitution is your supreme authority, and that is not true. We've already agreed God and the Bible. God's the supreme authority, and his book of the law is the Bible. So I don't understand the thinking behind that, but there's a confusion there from what I can see, because the English Constitution is not the supreme authority, as already agreed by Brian himself. So the Bible states at Joshua 1:8, this book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein, for then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success. Joshua 1:8 KJV, Authorized Version. So here it's explained about the two tiers of law, yet nowhere does it mention the Bible or God. Anyone who reads the Bible knows that we're not under the law. The law is for the dead. At Galatians 2:19 it says, for I through the law am dead to the law, that I might live unto God. And it says at Romans 6:14, for sin shall not have dominion over you, for ye are not under the law, but under grace. Like, the people of God are not under the law. They go by grace, not the law. So it talks here about the people's law on this screenshot, and it talks about government's law. And you'll find both the people's law and the government's law, as they call it, all under uklegislation.gov. You can find it all there. You can find the documents for the English Constitution there, which they've put forward, and you can find what they've called government's law there. So it's all in the same place, whereas the Bible's not mentioned here. That's in a different place. So there are two tiers of law. The Bible's known as the royal law. You can go and find that in at the Bible. It's not on the government's books because it's in a totally different jurisdiction. Although their books do say that via the Confession of Faith Ratification Act 1560 that the Bible's the infallible truth. So the legal guys say that the Bible's the infallible truth, and the Bible says you're not under the law, you're to go by grace. So that is another mistake, and yeah, it doesn't make sense what's stated here on this screenshot. So on to the next screenshot of the Peacekeepers website. Here they've got they call it the People's Fiduciary Constitution, a public trust. They've got the people, they've got independent judiciary, and the legislative and executive branch. Now these are the branches of state I believe they're pointing at here. Well, as Isaiah 33:22, it says, "The Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, the Lord is our king, he will save us." So that the Bible lays out quite clearly the three branches and of governance, and it clearly says the Lord is our judge, the Lord is our lawgiver, and the Lord is our king, he will save us. And the legal system, so that's what God says is the authority, and the legal system just copy it. They've got a judicial branch, a legislative branch, and the executive branch. So the legal system copy that of the biblical system, which anyone who's seen my work will understand very clearly that the legal system is just a derivative, a mirror image, a fake copy of the God's lawful system as explained in the Bible. So again, this screenshot and these statements are at complete loggerheads with what the Bible states. So I've written an article called Dear Christian Countrymen, which goes into this in a lot more detail. It will very clearly show how man's legal system just mirrors and copies God's lawful system. And that article is Dear Christian Countrymen, well worth a read if you're interested in this type of thing. So on to the next screenshot. And again, this is similar to the last one, really. They called it the true hierarchy of law. And they haven't mentioned God or the Bible. So it's not the true hierarchy of law, even by Brian's own admittance. I don't think I really need to expand on that. God in the Bible's not mentioned at all there. So, and that sits well above anything man's come up with and created. So I feel it's worth mentioning here. They mention equity, and the Bible has a lot to say about being iniquitous. And equity comes from the highest law there is, which Jesus says is to love thy neighbor. The other bits, common law and secondary legislation, they mention things like that there. That's all man-made. That's all man's laws, and that'll never be higher than what the Bible states. So they've missed out the highest point of authority there, which is the KJV 1611, God's word. So in this next section, it's called The Myth of the Unwritten Constitution. So they state, a common misconception is that the UK has an unwritten constitution. This is incorrect. While it is not contained in a single document, our constitution is written down in a series of foundational statutes and charters that create, define, and limit the powers of the state. So they've been very careless with their words in this screenshot in my assertion. Is it the UK constitution or is it the English constitution? Now, this is important because when I come to wrap up in a minute and get back to Brian's points, you can't call it the UK constitution in one hand and then the English constitution in the next. And it's this kind of sloppy attention to detail that is going to be highlighted in a minute when we get onto some of the really finer points of how law is written. And how it's written, you have to be very, very diligent. Now, I cannot believe that they've called it the UK, they've mentioned the United Kingdom here as an unwritten constitution. Well, is it the United Kingdom's constitution or is it the English constitution? They are confusing jurisdictions. The United Kingdom is a different jurisdiction than England. Anyone that's ever formed a limited company as a resident of the United Kingdom will know that the limited company is registered in England and Wales. That's a different political jurisdiction than the United Kingdom. So confusion jurisdictions, that's not good. That's a schoolboy error. Now, I grant you, anyone can make a mistake. So, nobody's infallible. No man's infallible. So I grant anyone can make a mistake. But these are fundamental principles. These are absolute basics. There's a huge difference at law between United Kingdom and England. So that's almost unforgivable, a mistake like that. So this slide follows on nicely from the last one, where I feel they've been sloppy with their jurisdictions. They call it United Kingdom, or is it England or United Kingdom? And here's another example that whoever wrote this they haven't quoted it exactly from the Acts and Statutes directly, and B, they don't know what a pronoun is, because in these acts, the people are written as a pronoun, i.e. that means with a capital P. So the lawmakers are very, very sneaky. Secular means without ethics and morality and lacking a belief in God. And the countries and the state are set up under the secular civil law system. So they are very, very sneaky indeed. And how they write law is extremely deceptive. You will see I will show you in a minute, that in these constitutional acts that these guys state as the English Constitution, when they quote people, they're using a pronoun. Because if you read the act as the introduction to these acts as a whole, they talk about civil rights, and some of them do, and subjects of the king. If you're a subject of the king, you've broken the very first commandment, which is have no other gods before me. And a small g god means rulers, kings, judges. So if you're a subject of the king, you've broken the very, very first commandment. And then by doing so, you break more commandments. But let's just try and not confuse matters. So whoever's written this has incorrectly quoted the act, because they've quoted here people without a capital P, which makes it a noun, not a pronoun, which is incorrect because the act itself doesn't say that. They use a pronoun, and a pronoun is a substitute for another word, because it can't be the people, because you can't be a people and subject to a king. That's not how it works. You can only be a people under God, and God says don't subject yourself to a king, which is why it's a pronoun, which is why they use the pronoun word people instead of how these guys have written it here as a noun. They've quoted it incorrectly, and the act itself doesn't say that. And that's important because in Brian's questions, he's done the same mistake again. That's why I point this out. Brian, in his questions, has misquoted one of the acts. I'll put his questions back up again so we can have a look at them. He's made the same mistake again. So here is Brian's questions. Well, he's misquoted the act, the Bill of Rights Act. And I don't think Brian knows what a pronoun is, because he stated here in quotes, lawfully and fully, freely representing all of the estates of the people of this realm. Well, in the act itself, estates is a pronoun, people is a pronoun, and realm is a pronoun. Now, these are massive mistakes. Law is written extremely carefully. And if you don't know what a pronoun is, then you're not going to get to the bottom of anything, and you're going to misread the legislation and these acts and the Constitution. You cannot be a people and be subject to a king, which is why they've put it as a pronoun, because it doesn't mean people. A pronoun is a substitute for another word. People, in this instance, in the Bill of Rights Act, as a pronoun, most likely means inhabitants, residents, which other acts that they've quoted for their constitution, which other acts go on to state. They call them inhabitants of this realm. And if you knew what a realm was, you'd know that it couldn't be people, because realm is to do with the government's rule and the sovereign's rule. So it's a fundamental error on Brian's part. And so underneath, Brian mentions the Act of Settlement, 1700, and here I think he's quoted it correctly. At least he's quoted people with the pronoun capital P. So he quoted it correctly on the second go at it, but they've misquoted it on their website, and so there's a lot of sloppy mistakes regarding jurisdictions and words, and you cannot do that if you're going to. That's why you end up not understanding what these things mean, in my opinion. So those are just fundamental mistakes. So here's the screenshot of the Bill of Rights Act. Oh, sorry, not the Bill of Rights Act. Bill of Rights, 1688. And as you can see, people. Brian misquoted people in his. It's a pronoun here, which means it's got a capital P, and a pronoun is a substitute for another word. They've written it as a pronoun, people, because it's a substitute for the word inhabitants. It must be, because you cannot be a people and be a subject of an earthly king, because this act, as stated, an act declaring the rights and liberties of the subject. Well, if you're a subject of an earthly king, you've broken the very first commandment, which is thou shalt have no other gods before me. And small g gods in that commandment means earthly rulers, kings, judges. So that is why people would be pronoun there, because it's impossible to be one of the people and the subject of the king. That does not work. It doesn't work like that. And it talks about the rights and liberties. Well, liberty is civil or political freedom. And that's what the Constitution does. It secures civil and political freedoms for its subjects. Well, if you're a subject, you've broken the very first commandment. And I don't want civil and political freedom, because that would mean it's been granted by the state and under the king. And that breaks the first commandment. So it's an oxymoron. That doesn't work. Again, you cannot be a subject of a king and be in good standing with God and the royal law, the Bible, because the Bible says you're not to be a subject of a king. So yeah, you cannot claim the English Constitution and be right with God. That doesn't work. And here we have the definition of subject, which just clearly points out why it's against biblical doctrine. It's a person under the control or dominion of another. God doesn't like persons in the Bible. There's plenty of evidence of that in my articles. Especially one who owes allegiance to a government or ruler. Again, that breaks the first commandment. A subject, person, or thing. To make subordinate. One that may be acted upon. That's why there's acts. This is why it breaks the first commandment. The Bill of Rights, 1688, is specifically about subjects. So, and that's why it can't be, that's why it's a pronoun, people, because people aren't mentioned in there, it's persons. So that's why it's a pronoun. It's a substitute for another word. And that's why it breaks the first commandment, and that's why I can't stand under it. And if you do so, you'll be breaking the first commandment of the royal law, of God's book of law. And so here we saw in the definition of a subject is one, especially one who owes allegiance to another. And here's the definition of allegiance. Ties or obligation of a citizen or subject to a government or sovereign. Loyalty of a liegeman to his lord, which is why it's against the first commandment. I hope everyone can see how blatantly obvious it is that being a subject of a king is very bad in the eyes of God. And that's what the Bill of Rights Act explicitly states in its opening preamble. It's to subjects, and we'll go on to look at what a liegeman is now. Again, so here's the definition of liege, and it just again highlights what the word subject means, and it's of lords entitled to feudal allegiance and service, a vassal to one lord, bound to render feudal allegiance and service, a vassal sworn to the service of support of a lord. And yes, again, that's why it's against the first commandment. So again, here's the definition of obligation, which is what a subject is under by definition. It's a binding pledge, commitment to fulfill a promise, obligation, duty, responsibility, put under obligation, binding with promises or by law or duty. The meaning that which one is bound or obliged to do, especially by moral or legal claims, a duty. The state or fact of being bound or constrained by gratitude or requite benefits, moral indebtedness. So that's what happens when you're a subject, and that's why it breaks one of the commandments, because God expects those things of you to him, not to another man. So that's why it's so bad. And most of these, most if not all of these constitutional documents refer to civil rights. They refer to subjects, and you cannot be a people and be a subject, because it's an oxymoron. It breaks the first commandment. So that's why it's a pronoun P. So I'm not going to go through every single one of these constitutional acts that the Peacekeepers have got on their site, but I'll go through. This is the Coronation Oath Act 1688. And I've underlined in green where we've got people again as a pronoun, and so is the word inhabitants. It also mentions civil rights. Well, I don't want civil rights because that pertains to civil law and civil society, which is how a state rules, by civil law, which is secularly organized, which is in opposition to God. Secular means lacking in ethics and morality and a belief in God. And of course, if you're under the state, you've walked away from God, and King Charles is now your Lord. We've just evidenced some of that with the word definition. So yeah, so even though God's mentioned in this act, by being under the jurisdiction of this very act, you will have broken the first commandment, and that is, have no other gods before me. Again, small g God is kings and earthly rulers. So yeah, I don't want civil rights. And people, again, here is with a pronoun. It's a pronoun, people, because it cannot apply to God's people, because God's people don't break the commandments. So the Coronation Oath Act refers to an inhabitant, and an inhabitant is a resident, one who dwells in a place permanently or for a considerable time. And the Bible has something to say about those who dwell. It says, "For as a snare shall it come on them who dwell on the face of the whole earth." So everything about these constitutional acts is repugnant to the Bible, to God and the teachings of the Bible. So again, we have this word realm, which on closer, if you just look at it a bit closely, you can see it is the domain under a sovereign, a royal jurisdiction. Well, again, if you're under a sovereign, then you've broken the first commandment. Government rule, that's what it means. Or some combination of the two. So some combination of a domain under a sovereign and government rule. That breaks the very first commandment. And at 2 Chronicles 15:5, it says, and in those times there was no peace to him that went out, nor to him that came in, but great vexations were upon all the inhabitants of the countries. These constitutional documents are about inhabitants of the country of England. That's not good in the eyes of the law, as I will touch on, but when we wrap up, because we're getting near, we'll start to sort of turn the corner now and come on the home straight. So let's now have a look at the Magna Carta. So the Magna Carta it's the Great Charter, and it's of English personal and political liberty. Well, if it's personal liberty, it's to do with persons, and Article 61 refers specifically and expressly to persons. And it says in the Bible that persons are not a good thing and God doesn't like them. So that's that point. And again, I'm not looking for personal to do with persons or political to do with body politics. I'm not looking for liberty under that. So a charter is a written instrument bestowing privileges and rights. My rules and regulations, if you like, come from the Bible. And so do those who would regard themselves as a people under God. That's the law document. If you get your privileges and rights from something, some legal instrument, then obviously you're going to be a subject of the king. Or it's to do with the state allowing you those privileges and rights. And the definition of charter is written instrument bestowing privileges and rights serving as legal evidence of them. So that says it all, really. I don't think I need to say any more than that. So going back to Brian's question for Clive. Given that the Bill of Rights 1688 explicitly states it is, quote, representing all the estates of the people, close quotes, he's quoted that wrong, so he doesn't understand what a pronoun is, and he's misquoted the act, which is why he doesn't understand what I've stated in the interview of Rachel. On what specific clause or primary source do you rely on to claim that, quote, the people, again, he's misquoted it again, close quotes, are excluded from the settlement? It's clear to me that Brian doesn't understand what people are. He doesn't understand what a pronoun is. And it seems he doesn't understand that when you make yourself subject to an earthly king in the realm of England, then you break the very first commandment. You break the very first of the 10 commandments. And I'll just touch on here at point 2. He says the claim, voting, the electoral roll is a trap. Clive's claim, registering to vote, is an act of consent that makes you a citizen. Again, anyone who's read the Bible, it says you're to make a singular vow, and a vote is a vow. They're synonymous terms, and a vote is a pledge to a deity, and a deity is a god. So you can see why in God's eyes, it's like, I'm your God, don't pledge to another God. We've just seen in evidence how becoming a subject makes you makes the king your lord, your master, which is why, you know, in the Bible it says no man can serve two masters. You got to choose your master. So that's just touches on that point there. And just to finish that point, by having the legal name on the electoral register, that is evidence of your consent to be governed by the state, by the political system, by the legal system. I've explained that the legal system is run by civil law, which is Roman law, and civil law is secularly organized. And secular means it's lacking in a morality and ethics and a belief in God. And now we know why. Because you turned your back on God and then go and serve an earthly king. I mean, I think that's quite straightforward, but I'll leave it to the audience to decide, on what I've put forward. And I think it's self-evident. So I've measured the English Constitution against the Bible, and it falls down at every single place. So I've placed on the screen what I've called the constitutional conundrum. God and oaths are mentioned in the Coronation Oath Act 1688. The Bill of Rights 1688 is about subjects. Those who promote the English Constitution have a huge dilemma and face a logical fallacy, which is, if the constitutional acts refer to God and oaths, they must accept that God is the supreme authority in terms of law and governance. And in fairness to Brian, he does accept that. That being the case, God states in his law book, the Bible, not to subject yourself to an earthly ruler, judge, or king. This breaks the very first commandment. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. It breaks many others as well, but I feel there's no need to press this point further. The English Constitution may well give better civil rights to the inhabitants of a realm, but that is breaking God's commandments and is sinful. So earlier we saw evidence from the Peacekeepers website. What they state is what they put forward as the two tiers of law, as they put it. I think it was government rule and the people's rule. Both are unlawful in the eyes of God. Man can't be a law unto themselves, so they can't be a people's law. And government rule means that you're a subject of an earthly king. So none of that works in the eyes of the Bible. And I've put forward, it's not my method, this is the two tiers of state. So all the legal side are on the left there, and they regard the biblical side over there on the right as the infallible truth. Their own rule book says so. So this is not my interpretation of anything. This is the facts as they stand. And I've written a good article which explains like the two families. You could look at it as two separate families because the legal system just mimic and copy the biblical system. So on the biblical side, it's Our Father who art in heaven. On the legal side, one of the titles for King Charles is Father of the Nation. Again, on the biblical side, Christ's church is known as Mother Church. So the legal side, again, just copy that. And the Church of England is known as Mother Church. Again, on God's side, on the lawful side, his people are sometimes referred to as children of God. And on the legal side, you're known as wards of the state, infants. So all they do is copy the lawful system. They take Christ out and they put a man in its place. And we make ourselves subject to an earthly king, which breaks the very first commandment. So you can find out more of this, the basics of law and governance and how it works, on all for free on my publicly available articles at capillarywave.com. So quite often I always like to, when there's a debate or when there's questions raised, I always see what the Bible has to say about it, and that will guide me on my decision making and therefore my actions that follow from that. So as we can see, when measured against the Bible, the English Constitution falls flat on its face because it's a creation of the state and it's for civil rights and to do with subjects. If you're a subject of the king, you've broke the very first commandment. So there is no freedom to be found in the English Constitution. And as I said earlier, that's not to say you can't have certain civil rights, but I'm not interested in civil rights. If it's civil rights you're after, yeah, by all means, go fill your boots with the English Constitution, but that doesn't interest me in the slightest. So I hope this short video has clarified that position. I may well write an article on it. Most of my articles can be found at capillarywave.com, where I walk people through the system of law and governance. So, including, I've got an article there called The Common Law Trap for Commoners. So a lot of people fall into the common law trap and believe common law is going to help them as well. Well, I dispel that myth too. So hopefully Brian takes this message in the way that it was intended, that is in good faith. And if he's genuinely seeking the truth, then he'll put the Constitution down and pick up the Bible. So thanks very much.
So this is from Ezekiel 36, 24 to 28. For I will take you from among the heathen and gather you out of all countries, and will bring you into your own land. Then I will sprinkle clean water upon you, and ye shall be clean. From all your filthiness and from all your idols will I cleanse you. A new heart also will I give you, and a new spirit will I put within you. And I will take away the stony heart out of your flesh, and I will give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you, and cause you to walk in my statutes, and ye shall keep my judgments and do them. Shall I just say that part again? You will walk in my statutes, and ye shall keep my judgments and do them. And ye shall dwell in the lands that I gave to your fathers, and ye shall be my people, and I will be your God.